The aching knees. The waiting room hummed with a tense anticipation that seemed to amplify the ache in Mr. Abernathy's knees. Each rustle of paper, each stifled cough, each restless shift echoed the throbbing in his joints. He sat rigidly, his tweed jacket a thin shield against the frigid air conditioning, a time-worn manila envelope containing his medical history clutched like a lifeline. Abernathy. The receptionist's voice, laced with impatience, cut through the atmosphere. He pushed himself up, a flare of pain igniting in his knees, each step a small act of defiance against the erosion of time. Dr. Stern remained absorbed in his work as Mr. Abernathy entered. His desk was a chaotic landscape of paperwork. The room itself smelled of disinfectant and harried breaths. Abernathy, Abernathy, Stern mumbled, eyes glued to the monitor. Knees, is it? What's the issue? Mr. Abernathy edged forward, his gaze drawn to a crookedly hung diploma on the wall. It's the arthritis, doctor. It's been worsening lately, particularly in the mornings. Stern finally glanced up, his expression barely masking his irritation. Mornings, evenings, it's all the same really. Arthritis is a familiar foe. We're not breaking any new ground here. He gestured towards the examination table with a dismissive flick of his wrist. Up you go. Hobbs felt cruelly ironic, Mr. Abernathy mused, as he awkwardly hauled himself onto the table, his breathing strained and shallow. The examination was brief, almost cursory. A few quick pokes, a hurried listen with his stethoscope, and a fleeting glance at the proffered X-rays. Right, Stern said, already pivoting back to his desk. Just as I thought. Degenerative joint disease. Irreversible, I'm afraid. I'll write you something for the discomfort. Mr. Abernathy straightened, a wave of disappointment washing over him. But doctor, is there anything else? Perhaps physical therapy? Some exercises, maybe. Stern waved away the suggestion. Physical therapy? A fool's errand. Just take the pills. They'll ease the pain. He scribbled on a prescription pad, tore off the sheet, and presented it to Mr. Abernathy without meeting his gaze. Next! He announced, his voice now directed toward the door. Mr. Abernathy accepted the prescription, their fingers momentarily grazing. He longed to articulate the persistent ache that plagued him, to somehow connect with the man before him, but the words eluded him. He was merely another aging patient, another item on a crammed schedule, an inconvenience to be processed. As he prepared to leave, Dr. Stern spoke, still not looking up. 2 pills a day. And try to take it easy. Outside, the waiting room continued its low thrum. Mr. Abernathy ambled toward the pharmacy counter, the prescription a weight in his hand. He harbored a quiet certainty that the medication would offer little reprieve. He had detected the subtle weariness in Dr. Stern's eyes, the dismissive set of his mouth. A placebo, he surmised, designed to quiet his concerns and usher him out. A wave of sorrow washed over him, not for himself, but for the young doctor, trapped in a cycle of brisk efficiency and detached concern. He wondered what experiences had forged such indifference, such a reluctance to acknowledge the individual behind the ailing limbs. He paid for the prescription and emerged into the bright sunlight, the small vial of pills feeling heavy in his pocket. He would take them, of course. He would adhere to the instructions. But he placed little faith in their efficacy. Real solace, he understood, would have to be sourced elsewhere. He would draw upon the quiet resilience that had sustained him through hardship, the same strength that allowed him to stand upright, even as his knees threatened to betray him. The little white pill. The small white tablet tasted faintly of plaster as it dissolved on Mr. Abernathy's tongue. Washed down with tepid tea, whose flowery scent did little to cut through the thrumming in his joint, it was his second dose today, precisely as Dr. Stern directed. Supposedly, relief was imminent. He lingered, hoping. A stab at the newspaper's crossword proved futile, the letters swam before his eyes, mocking his diminished acuity. He gave up, the discarded paper landing with a sigh on the overloaded table. The armchair, molded to the contours of his body after years of quiet evenings, usually offered comfort. Today, even its familiarity failed him. Another hour bled by. The ache persisted, a dull, relentless presence. Perhaps more time was needed, he reasoned with a sigh, reaching for his well-thumbed Moby Dick, hoping the epic struggle would sweep him away from the nagging pain. But even Ahab's obsession paled against the insistent gnawing. He closed the book, resignation settling in like a shroud. Deep down, he suspected these pills were useless. He had sensed it in Dr. Stern's perfunctory manner, in the hastily scribbled prescription. Yet, a tiny ember of hope had flickered, promising respite. Now, it sputtered and died. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Stern was already 15 minutes behind. Mrs. Henderson's bunions, young Timmy Nelson's earache, Mr. Davies' unwavering belief that his gout was flaring despite his carefully controlled diet, each patient presented a challenge, a problem to be solved and efficiently discharged. He was a physician, not a miracle worker. He vaguely recalled the elderly man from yesterday, the one with the hip complaint. Abernathy, maybe? He'd seen countless others like him, their bodies worn by age and circumstance. He'd prescribed the usual, the standard protocol, the something or other. He couldn't quite bring it to mind. It was irrelevant. A waiting room teemed with people, a mountain of charts awaited. He finalized Mrs. Henderson's notes, the keyboard clicking a rapid tattoo in the clinical quiet of his office. He glanced at the framed diplomas, testaments to years of grueling study, unwavering dedication, significant achievements. He deserved punctuality, respect, recognition. He pressed the intercom. "Send in Mr. Petrov," he announced, his voice coated with practiced cordiality, a veneer masking his mounting irritation. The day stretched endlessly before him, an unending stream of ailments, and he had no time to spare for forgotten patients or inconsequential medication. 7 years gone. 7 years spun by in a whirlwind of gleaming stainless steel and hushed consultations. Dr. Edwin Stern, his hairline receding slightly but his reputation burgeoning, had become a name whispered with reverence in the medical community. His clinic, once a modest affair, now boasted a sleek, minimalist design, a testament to his undeniable success. The waiting room overflowed daily with patients eager to benefit from his expertise. A montage flickered through his mind, newspaper clippings announcing his groundbreaking research on cardiovascular health. The polite applause at medical conferences as he presented his findings. The satisfied smiles of patients, younger patients, who recovered quickly under his care. Each image a brick in the wall he was building, a fortress against the nagging fear of inadequacy that still haunted him in the dead of night. Next, he barked, his voice sharper than he intended. Mrs. Higgins, a woman whose age was etched into the delicate lines around her eyes, shuffled into his office, clutching a worn handkerchief. "Doctor, dear, I've been feeling a bit faint lately," she began, her voice trembling. Stern tapped his pen impatiently against the pristine surface of his desk. "Mrs. Higgins, we've been over this. Your tests are all normal. It's likely just age-related. Are you taking your medication as prescribed?" "Yes, doctor, but, good. Then there's nothing more I can do for you today. Try getting more rest." He ushered her towards the door with a perfunctory smile that didn't reach his eyes. Later, as he reviewed her file, a faint twinge of guilt pricked him. He dismissed it. He had a schedule to keep. A reputation to uphold. His evenings were a study in controlled boredom. The same expensive scotch, the same muted jazz, the same view of the city lights from his penthouse apartment. He dated, of course, women who were as polished and ambitious as he was. But the conversations always felt transactional, a mere exchange of pleasantries and career aspirations. There was a void within him, a hollowness that his accomplishments couldn't fill. One evening, he found himself staring at his reflection in the darkened window. The man staring back was successful, respected, wealthy. Yet, there was a weariness in his eyes, a lack of genuine joy that no amount of recognition could mask. He was a machine, efficiently diagnosing and treating, but somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the human element of his profession. The connection, the empathy, had withered. He thought of Mrs. Higgins, her frail hands, her worried eyes. He thought of all the Mrs. Higginses he had dismissed over the years, their ailments relegated to the inevitable decline of old age. A sigh escaped his lips, a sound heavier than he expected. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to his internal struggle. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the silence of his apartment amplifying the unease that had begun to stir within him. Something had to change. The weight of the past. The memo was crisp, unforgiving. Mandatory review of all patient files predating 2017. Data security protocols, something about HIPAA compliance, endless bureaucratic jargon that Dr. Stern usually delegated to Bethany. But this time, the directive was clear, physician oversight required. He sighed, the sound swallowed by the sterile air of his office. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, turning the meticulously organized rows of bookshelves into a maze of darkness. He'd rather be anywhere else. The golf course, perhaps. Or even enduring Penelope's incessant chatter about her latest pottery class. Anything was better than dredging up the past. He pulled the first box, its cardboard worn and dusty. The files within were thin, manila folders holding a lifetime of ailments, anxieties, and whispered confessions. He flipped through them, skimming diagnoses, medications, follow-up notes. Glaucoma, hypertension, seasonal allergies. The endless parade of aging bodies and their failing parts. He felt a familiar weariness settle upon him, a leaden cloak of inadequacy. Was this all he was? A glorified mechanic patching up broken machines? Hours blurred. The stack of reviewed files grew slowly, painstakingly. His eyes burned, his neck ached. Just as he was about to concede defeat and reschedule for the next day, a name caught his eye. Abernathy. The folder was thicker than the others, its edges softened with age. He hesitated. The name stirred something within him, a faint echo of a memory he couldn't quite grasp. He opened the file. The familiar medical jargon swam before his eyes, but a photograph clipped to the first page jolted him awake. A frail, elderly man with kind eyes and a disarming smile. Mr. Abernathy. A wave of unease washed over him, cold and clammy. He remembered the man's persistent cough, the shadow on his lung X-ray. He remembered something else. Something he'd buried deep, beneath layers of ambition and self-deception. He flipped through the notes, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Patient expressing concerns, quality of life, prognosis grim. His own handwriting, neat and precise, yet somehow alien. He saw the recommended treatment plan, the referrals he'd promised to make. And then, the chilling absence of any follow-up. A blank space where compassion should have been. He remembered now. The golf tournament. The promised tea time with the hospital board. The pressure to impress, to secure funding for the new surgical wing. Mr. Abernathy, with his quiet desperation, had simply been inconvenient. A loose end he'd carelessly snipped. He closed the file, his hand trembling. The weight of the past settled upon him, heavier than he could have imagined. He was no longer Dr. Edwin Stern, the respected physician. He was simply Edwin, a man burdened by a choice he'd made years ago, a choice that had condemned a man to a lonely, silent decline. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful spectacle that offered him no solace. He sat in the gathering darkness, the Abernathy file heavy in his lap, the silence broken only by the frantic beat of his own guilty heart. Unexpected detour. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died with a final, pathetic wheeze. Dr. Stern gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Damn it," he muttered, a sound swallowed by the sudden, absolute silence. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. Just a faint click, mocking him with its futility. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, a gesture that released a sliver of frustration but did little to solve his predicament. He was stranded on a desolate stretch of road, the late afternoon sun casting long, skeletal shadows of bare trees across the asphalt. He checked his phone. 1 bar. Enough to make a call, maybe, but not enough for a map or a ride-sharing app. He weighed his options. He could wait for someone to happen by, but that could take hours. Or he could walk. He scanned the horizon. In the distance, he thought he saw a building. Squinting, he recognized the familiar, blocky architecture of the Veterans Hospital. Relief, sharp and unexpected, flooded him. A hospital. He could ask for help, maybe even use their phone. He grabbed his briefcase, locked the car, and started walking. The gravel crunched under his polished shoes, a jarring contrast to the smooth leather of his briefcase handle. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. He pulled his coat tighter around him, the inadequacy he always fought creeping back. Even his car, it seemed, was rebelling against him. The hospital loomed closer, its grey facade a stark reminder of the less glamorous side of medicine. He quickened his pace, eager to escape the growing chill and the gnawing unease that had become his constant companion. He pushed through the heavy glass doors, the whoosh of air a brief reprieve from the outside world. The reception area was a cacophony of sounds, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the hushed conversations of worried families, the distant cries of someone in pain. The air hung thick with the antiseptic smell of disinfectant, a smell that both comforted and repelled him. He approached the reception desk, where a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda was busy typing. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely audible above the din. Brenda looked up, her expression weary. "Can I help you?" "My car broke down just down the road," he explained. "I was wondering if I could use your phone to call for a tow truck." "Of course," she said, gesturing to a phone on the wall. "Help yourself." As he dialed, his gaze drifted across the waiting area. An elderly man sat hunched in a wheelchair, his eyes vacant. A young woman paced nervously, clutching a tissue. A group of veterans sat huddled together, their faces etched with the unspoken stories of war. The scene was a tableau of suffering and resilience, a stark reminder of the fragility of human existence. He finished his call, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He needed to get out of here, back to his comfortable office, back to the illusion of control he so desperately clung to. But as he turned to leave, a voice, raspy and weak, stopped him. "Doctor?" He turned back, his eyes scanning the room. The voice seemed to come from one of the veterans sitting near the window. An old man with a shock of white hair and eyes that held a surprising spark of intensity. It was Abernathy. A hero's recognition. The band hammered out a strident march, the kind designed to ignite patriotic fervor, but Edwin felt only a weary detachment. He lingered at the throng's edge, a graying tableau of veterans in crisply pressed uniforms, the setting sun sparking off polished medals. Margaret had strong-armed him into attending. "A little respect, Edwin," she declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. "They earned it." He covertly surveyed the assembly, seeking an unobtrusive exit. The manufactured bonhomie, the cloying pronouncements about valor and obligation, grated on him. Such affairs invariably left a sour taste, highlighting the bland predictability of his existence, dedicated as it was to the sanitized realm of medicine, insulated from genuine peril. Then he noticed him. Across the bustling plaza, erect in a faded, ill-fitting brown suit, stood Mr. Abernathy. Edwin squinted, doubting his eyes. What could his meek, unassuming patient be doing at a tribute to veterans? Abernathy, perpetually scented with aged wool and bearing the subdued air of a man accustomed to setbacks. But it was undeniably him. The finely etched lines around his eyes, the gentle set of his lips, the subtle lift of his chin, less defiance, more quiet fortitude. The MC, a rotund figure with a stentorian voice, commenced reading an accolade. Edwin craned his neck, the music having momentarily ceased. Conspicuous gallantry in the face of overwhelming enemy aggression during the assault on Hamburger Hill. The words resonated with solemn weight. Abernathy? A combatant of exceptional bravery? Edwin's mind struggled to reconcile the image of the fragile, elderly gentleman he'd recently examined, complaining of a mere nagging cough, with the actions described, a soldier who had single-handedly repelled an enemy surge, safeguarding his entire unit. The citation unfurled, chronicling Abernathy's fearlessness, his altruism, his unwavering devotion to his brothers in arms. A wave of heat prickled Edwin's skin. He recalled his curtness with Abernathy, the cavalier manner with which he dismissed his worries, the patronizing inflection he'd employed when outlining the prescribed treatment. Now, witnessing Abernathy accept the Distinguished Service Cross, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly as the medal was affixed to his jacket, Edwin experienced a profound pang of shame. This man, this quiet, self-effacing man, had confronted terrors beyond his comprehension, had jeopardized his life for others, had garnered the esteem and veneration of a grateful nation. And Edwin had treated him like a bothersome inconvenience. The crowd exploded in applause, a tidal wave of sound that crashed over Edwin, leaving him feeling vulnerable and diminished. Abernathy, his face a mask of unassuming humility, simply inclined his head, his gaze drifting across the audience. For a fleeting instant, their eyes locked. There was no reproach in Abernathy's expression, no condemnation, only a subdued comprehension. It was a look that struck Edwin like a physical blow. He averted his eyes, seized by a sudden, overpowering urge to flee. The fanfare, the speeches, the accolades, they all rang hollow. He shouldered his way through the throng, the combined aroma of stale aftershave and moth repellent clinging to him, a persistent reminder of his own shortcomings. He had seen a patient, a clinical puzzle, a problem requiring a solution. He had overlooked the human being. The price of pride. The silence in Dr. Stern's lavish office roared in his ears, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the ER. The city pulsed beyond the glass, indifferent to the tempest brewing within him. He pivoted in the plush chair, the fine leather a subtle irritant against his skin, mirroring the deeper disquiet that plagued him. Abernathy. The name hammered at his temples, a relentless pulse of remorse. He saw the man's lined face, the quiet dignity residing in his gaze, the slight tremor as he'd signed his life over. He'd relegated Abernathy to just another geriatric case, a blip on his overbooked schedule. Now, a framed article on the desk, perched on polished mahogany, screamed the truth: Abernathy, a war veteran, a man who'd stared down death for his country. Stern squeezed his eyes shut, the ghostly echo of Abernathy's X-rays imprinted on his vision. He'd spotted the shadow on the lung, the treacherous growth demanding swift action. But he'd also glimpsed an opportunity to burnish his reputation, to reaffirm his ego, to quiet the nagging feeling that he was undeserving of the accolades he received. He'd championed the high-risk procedure, glossing over the perils, inflating the potential rewards. He'd justified it as being in the patient's best interest, but his conscience knew better. Rising, he approached the window, observing the urban sprawl below. The lights glittered like fallen stars, their beauty a cruel reminder of his tarnished victory. His success, he standing, the carefully curated persona, all felt fragile, on the verge of collapse. Abernathy's valor, his selflessness, illuminated the chasm within Stern. His relentless pursuit of recognition had been a futile attempt to fill an indefinable void. And in that chase, he'd morphed into the very thing he despised, a charlatan. Guilt, a leaden blanket, stifled his breath. He recalled the offhand manner, the condescending tone he'd used with Abernathy. How easily he'd brushed aside the man's worries, his questions. How readily he had put his well-being at risk for personal advancement. He needed to act. He could no longer bear the weight of this suffocating shame. The prospect of facing Abernathy, of laying bare his deceit, filled him with dread. To confess his imperfections, to reveal his vulnerabilities. But the alternative, the lifetime sentence of regret, was untenable. Stern returned to his desk, his steps measured, resolve solidifying with each pace. He reached for the phone, his hand betraying him with a slight quiver as he dialed the hospital. He had to find Abernathy, to offer amends. The price of hubris had been too steep. It was time to settle his account. Forgiveness and understanding. The wind, sharp as shattered glass, nipped at Dr. Stern's skin as he distinguished Mr. Abernathy near the war memorial, a solitary figure against the thinning crowd. The Veterans' Day service had ended, the bugle's plaintive cry still lingering in Stern's memory. He faltered, the burden of his past a tangible weight on his chest. He deliberately avoided Abernathy's gaze throughout the ceremony, shame leaving a metallic tang in his mouth. But avoidance was no longer an option. He approached, the crunch of his leather soles a stark counterpoint to the solemn setting. Abernathy stood erect, his attention riveted on the carved names. The afternoon sun burnished his silver hair, creating a fragile corona. "Mr. Abernathy." Stern's voice emerged raspy, almost unrecognizable. Abernathy turned, his gaze surprisingly keen despite his age. A subtle dip of the head was his only acknowledgement. Stern swallowed, the lump in his throat making it difficult. I owe you an apology." Silence descended, thick and heavy, Abernathy's expression an inscrutable mask. The rustle of oak leaves amplified the palpable tension. 7 years ago, Stern pressed on, his voice gaining a fragile strength, "I wasn't forthright with you. Concerning your health. Concerning everything." The words felt pitifully inadequate after so much time. "My own anxieties, my own failings, clouded my professional judgment. I was wrong, Mr. Abernathy. Profoundly so." He paused, steeling himself for the inevitable backlash. He'd earned it. Understanding, faint but distinct, flickered in Abernathy's eyes. "Time has passed, Doctor." "That offers no justification," Stern insisted, a fervent desire for expiation gripping him. He noticed the deep furrows bracketing Abernathy's mouth, a slight tremor in his hands, and the enormity of his deceit felt crushing. "I manipulated you. I was dishonest. And I am profoundly sorry." A ghost of a smile played on Abernathy's lips. "The past is a millstone, Doctor. It can grind a man to dust." He paused, his gaze returning to the memorial. "We all stumble. Some falls are harder than others. But clinging to them, that's a choice we make." Stern stared, astonished. He'd anticipated condemnation, not this quiet compassion. "Forgiveness isn't condoning the wrong," Abernathy continued, his voice a low, unwavering current. "It's releasing yourself from bitterness and resentment. It's about letting go, allowing the wound to close." He turned back, his insightful gaze penetrating Stern's carefully constructed defenses. "You came here today, Doctor. You confessed your error. That required fortitude. Forgive yourself, Doctor. The world has enough wounded already, what it needs are healers." A painful knot formed in Stern's throat. He braced for anything but acceptance. A weight he'd carried for years evaporated, replaced by an unfamiliar lightness. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," he managed, his voice thick with emotion, utterly sincere. "Thank you." Abernathy simply nodded, a quiet knowing in his eyes. He faced the memorial once more, leaving Dr. Stern standing in the amber glow of the setting sun, a nascent hope-taking root. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying not the harsh breath of autumn, but the soft promise of renewal. A doctor's new heart. Mr. Abernathy's dying words clung to Dr. Stern like a persistent shadow, a dull throb behind his breastbone. "It's not too late for goodness, Doctor," had resonated in his soul long after the veteran's passing. Initially dismissed as the ramblings of a dying man medicated with morphine, the phrase nagged at him, a splinter beneath the skin. He'd catch himself adrift during consultations, the sterile decor of his practice suddenly oppressive. He began subtly. He lent an ear, a genuine one, to Mrs. Peterson's cat chronicles, young Timmy's schoolyard anxieties, Mr. Henderson's back pain symphonies. No more interruptions, no more glances at his watch, no more reducing individuals to billing codes. The initial weeks proved excruciating. He felt clumsy, inauthentic. His regimented schedule crumbled, appointments overlapping, the carefully curated waiting room music drowned out by the clamor of actual human connection. Yet, imperceptibly, something changed. He detected a newfound gentleness in his own expression, a sincere warmth in his tone. He started discerning the narratives etched onto their faces, the worries lurking behind practiced smiles, the silent desperation of the overlooked. Improvements followed. Maria, the new receptionist, possessed a rare gift for names and a comforting word for everyone. Gone were the stark, modern prints, replaced by soothing landscapes that softened the clinical atmosphere. Even the simple act of offering tea and coffee in the waiting area seemed to make a difference. One afternoon, Sarah, her eyes swollen with tears, arrived. Years of infertility struggles had brought her to the brink of surrender after another failed cycle. Dr. Stern offered no empty reassurances. He simply listened as her grief poured out raw and unfiltered. He spoke with tenderness, acknowledging her anguish, reminding her of her inner fortitude. The hour he spent with her stretched far beyond the usual 15-minute slot, and she departed with a fraction more hope rekindled. News traveled swiftly. Dr. Stern, formerly esteemed for his efficiency and expertise, became known for his empathy. Patients sought him out, not for groundbreaking treatments, but for his attentive ear and comforting presence. His waiting room remained full, yet pulsed with a different energy, one of confidence, anticipation, and authentic rapport. Mr. Abernathy often crossed his mind. The veteran's words served as a moral compass, guiding him through the uncharted territory of a newly awakened conscience. He came to understand that success transcended accolades and overflowing coffers. It resided in positive impact, in making the world marginally brighter. It resided in simple human decency. A package arrived one day, the address scrawled in a frail hand. Inside, he discovered a well-worn leather journal and a time-worn photograph of a youthful soldier in uniform. Mr. Abernathy. A note accompanied the items. He wanted you to have this. He said you would understand. Signed, Margaret Abernathy. Dr. Stern gingerly opened the journal. The initial entry dated back to 1944. And he began to read.